A worked Honda engine had almost become the forgotten part of one of F1's biggest projects until a claim at the start of this year that Honda has been struggling. Since a new Aston Martin-Honda partnership was announced in May 2023, very little has been said about the two manufacturers that are joining forces. That's partly because Honda is still working and winning with Red Bull until the end of 2025, and partly because there's been so much else going on at Aston Martin, both good and bad. But when a quote emerged from the overall boss of the Honda F1 program in January this year, claiming that Honda was struggling with its 2026 development, suddenly the Japanese manufacturer was back in the headlines. Honda Racing Corporation President Koji Watanabe said in a group interview at the Daytona 24 Hours that the development of the new F1 engine had been not so easy and we are struggling. At face value, this is not a good sign. For all the success Honda has enjoyed in recent years, winning more races than any other engine manufacturer since its first season with Red Bull in 2019, nobody will forget how disastrous the program was to start with. So it's inevitably concerning to hear such a senior Honda figure talk of struggling at the start of a new rules cycle, especially off the back of a weird intended withdrawal from F1 at the end of 2021, then a U-turn before its engine ever actually disappeared. Honda's success with Red Bull has set a very high bar that gets even higher when you remember Honda's joining up with the ambitious Aston Martin project. This is working through problems of its own as it tries to utilise the massive investment from Chairman Lawrence Stroll and his consortium. But the tie-up brings together the team that has spared no expense to make itself an F1 giant, one of, if not the greatest designers ever in Adrian Newey, a double world champion driver in Fernando Alonso, and an engine manufacturer that has won half the races it's entered since getting its act together with Red Bull in 2019. Failure is not an option, so what's really going on? There is clearly a very real possibility of Honda struggling, whether that's because of its own reorganisations, which we'll come to shortly, the sheer challenge of the 2026 engine rules, or a mix of both. But based on our past dealings with Honda representatives, this matter also had the air of misinterpretation. It's not our business to make excuses, but the bigger the language barrier, the easier it is for someone to misspeak, and that's often been our experience with Japanese natives who might innocuously use a word that's more dramatic than intended. Plus, with respect, Watanabe is one of the many senior Honda executives who has tended to err on the side of being a bit boring in the past, so it would be a surprise if he suddenly admitted to the program being in trouble in an open media session. And in our own conversations with Honda and Watanabe since then, it's been insisted that suggesting it's been a struggle was just a poor choice of words. Watanabe told us that the new rules are technically very tough, challenging and difficult. There's no pretending otherwise, but there's also no indication that Honda has fallen behind or is in disarray. It's also known that Honda is extremely ambitious with its engine targets, a legacy of how it effectively turned around its fortunes in the V6 turbo hybrid era. Honda willingly took on extremely difficult tasks with ingenious approaches to get on top of its weaknesses on both the internal combustion engine and the energy recovery systems. This included adopting Honda jet technology to make the turbines in the MGU-H function better and completely redesigning how the cylinders inside the V6 were sited and spaced apart. Nothing's been revealed so far about what kind of technology Honda is getting creative with on the 2026 engine. It's more a case of the scale of ambition not being hidden and Honda's recent track record affording it the benefit of the doubt. But while it would be a shock if Honda's trending towards a McLaren 2015 level disaster, expectations are sky high, so it won't take much to fall short of what's required. Someone who knows a thing or two about overcoming major hurdles at the start of a new set of engine rules is Aston Martin Group CEO and F1 team boss Andy Cowell, who led the Mercedes engine program to its utterly dominant start to the hybrid era in 2014. Cowell admits the development process is not going absolutely perfectly, but if it was, then the targets have probably been set too low. He believes the program is moving in the right direction at a good pace, which almost certainly means there have been some setbacks, but not enough to set alarm bells ringing. As Cowell put it, is it ever enough? Is anybody ever going to say that we're achieving enough every single week? No, nobody's ever going to say that. There's arguably nobody better qualified than Cowell to judge the competency of an F1 engine project, even if we have to take things with a pinch of salt, given he's not going to publicly pan the entire thing. Cowell joined Aston Martin on October 1st, 2024 as Group CEO, taking over from Martin Whitmarsh, who'd been instrumental in getting Honda on board for 2026. Winding back a little to that Honda change of heart, announcing in late 2020 it had decided to axe its F1 program led to the reassignment of a huge number of engineers and project leaders over the next 12 months. The The technician required to service the 22 to 25 continuation deal with Red Bull were retained, and there was at least some work going on keeping an eye on the 2026 engine rules discussions. But Honda's Sakura F1 setup was gutted, and staff were redeployed elsewhere on other Honda electrification projects like vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, fuel cell and hybrid development. Plus, its UK facility was taken over by Red Bull powertrains. Then, as a result of F1's rules changing, and we understand Aston Martin offering a lot of money to do the project as well, Honda changed its mind. It finally decided in 2023 to build a new engine for 2026 after all, and switch teams after Red Bull was forced to set up its own engine company in the expectation Honda was quitting for real. Since then, Honda's been reassigning people internally and recruiting from outside, but it inevitably lost some momentum and needed to restructure, so there was always a concern that this would be a big hurdle to overcome. Cal only knew Honda as an aspiring competitor when he was managing director of Mercedes high-performance powertrains. He was aware of its ambition and noted from afar how much it had invested in turning around its initially failing F1 engine. But it wasn't until he joined Aston Martin and visited Honda's Sakura facility in October that the scale of what Honda has to offer dawned on him. Cal told us he was blown away by the facilities there, and not just the infrastructure and technologies, but the way Honda was going about its testing. That includes its approach to development, the atmosphere in the building, and the way the test engineers and technicians were working together. He said there was a buzz about it beyond the super impressive capital investment, which seems to have really hit home. Cal had a reputation at Mercedes for fostering a stellar working culture at HPP's Brixworth base, which combined with strong organisation and communication to great effect. The value of top-class engineers coming up with creative ideas is high, but Cal emphasises how this translates into the environment testing those ideas in reality, as in his experience, this is where the real learnings of an engine come together. Though he's not working with Honda on a day-to-day basis, Cal says he was really impressed by the hunger of the engineers and what they were chasing from a time perspective, which we can take to mean a very ambitious timeline to achieve the targets. The way the Aston Martin-Honda project actually works is an interesting and international alliance between several big players. Aside from the car development taking place at Aston Martin's Silverstone headquarters in the UK, there's Honda leading engine development in Japan with some work shared with its US division, and international divisions of Aramco and Valvoline developing the new 100% sustainable fuel and lubricants respectively. From 2026, maintenance and trackside support will be conducted by the new UK division of HRC that has been established. Cal is quite pleased with this setup and says he hasn't made any big changes since joining, just offered guidance on some targets and priority orders. The way it works seems to have a good foundation. While it is quite grand on paper to see how widespread the combination is, in reality most works teams aren't really in one place. Once you remove the option of working together day to day in the same building, the advantages or disadvantages of location are reduced quite a lot, especially as in a post-COVID world, Cal believes we've all learned to work anywhere on the planet. As far as he sees it, each area needs to be left alone and trusted to develop their respective technologies, as long as there is clear communication and transparency on targets, progress, or new experiments that produce new information. For example, Cal says he has no interest in meddling with Honda's work on combustion efficiency. But as Aston Martin is progressing its aerodynamic development and aero efficiency, it's working very closely with Honda regarding heat rejection levels and fluid temperatures. Those specific conversations come up in regular meetings and follow the initial discussions over the chassis engine installation and shape of the various power unit components, although as Cal points out, a lot of this is defined already by increasingly prescriptive regulations. The gearbox being developed at Silverstone will be taken to Sakura and tested as a full assembly there, with Aston Martin engineers going with it. That mitigates some of the disadvantage of not being on the same time zone for communication, but also observing research and development, although of course there is a limit to the efficiency of this process when it comes to sending something from Silverstone to Japan. It then has to all go back to the UK as the back of the car comes together, fitted with radiators and various ancillary components, so the back part of the chassis gets built, as that's the best way to hold it all together. That point where a whole car effectively will be running in the factory is where the teams around the world provide individual parts that all come together under the watch of a group at Silverstone. On the fuel side, which is an even more critical part of the engine rules for 2026 and could be decisive in which manufacturer has the edge, fuel candidates developed by Aramco get tested on a single-cylinder engine at Sakura. Then the best ones make it onto the V6 for performance and endurance testing. Likewise, there are dozens of tests on Valvoline lubricants before they are ever introduced to an actual Honda engine. In terms of the final form this will all lead to, because of what Honda concedes was a slightly late start on the 2026 engine as a result of its toing and froing, it will push its homologation until February next year to develop solutions until the very last moment. Honda is satisfied with the progress so far, and while it is obviously not ready to go racing yet, 12 months out, Cal believes the deciding factors will be the ambition of the technology and the time frame, which he says have led to a really nice creative buzz. What's unanswerable as of March 2025, of course, is just how much progress Honda can actually make from here, and whether difficulties or challenges turn into struggles after all.